First day on the job, Olivia Bennett officially took charge. She marched into the operations center and spotted a guy asleep at his desk. Head buried in his arms, surrounded by 24 screens flashing urgent security alerts. She didn't ask a single question, didn't even glance at the screens. She never gave the exhausted man a split second to explain himself. Right in front of the entire tech floor, she stripped his badge and fired him on the spot. Andrew Foster had barely raised his heavy eyes before she completely shut him down. But just hours later, the entire payment infrastructure started collapsing, layer by layer. Would Olivia ever realize the guy she fired was the sole reason this company survived the last 48 hours? Aurelius Pay wasn't someplace where a few slow minutes just meant grabbing coffee. They were a massive financial technology firm pushing huge corporate transactions, high-speed wire transfers, and heavy transaction authentication for thousands of clients all across the United States. The network had to run perfectly. Even a brief system failure meant losing tens of millions of dollars, creating the kind of catastrophic brand damage that takes years to fix. The infrastructure literally was the company. Everything else was just window dressing built right around it. Andrew held the title of Senior Systems Engineer, though that label completely failed to capture his real burden. He was just 34 years old. Quiet, the way people who carry the heaviest burdens stop needing to announce themselves. Totally blind to the petty internal politics that seemed to consume all his co-workers. New hires usually looked past him, assuming he was completely unremarkable and out of touch. Always a bit rumpled, his eyes holding the heavy shadows of serious burnout. A cold cup of coffee perpetually sitting forgotten right by his keyboard. You and I both know guys like this. He never made himself visible. But the veteran tech team who worked beside him held a totally different understanding. Andrew understood Aurelius Pay's network architecture the way a veteran surgeon knows a patient they've saved multiple times. He understood those ancient API layers dating back almost 10 full years. The fragile failover logic 3 different chief technology officers swore to modernize, but never did. The messy access control structures he had patched entirely by hand across multiple system transitions, managing those incredibly fragile interdependencies that survived only because somebody once engineered a quick fix to a problem that didn't even exist anymore. But ripping it out would have triggered an absolute disaster. He was the walking institutional memory this company never even bothered to properly document. To upper management, he was just a tiny line on an organizational chart. But listen to me, to the software, he alone knew where every load-bearing wall stood. Outside work, Andrew was raising a 7-year-old girl named Chloe entirely alone, quiet and fiercely perceptive. She was old enough in her spirit to actually unnerve adults expecting a simple kid. His wife had passed away several years back after a brutal, prolonged illness. Since that dark day, Andrew rebuilt his entire world around 2 fixed pillars, keeping Chloe safe and holding down a steady job so she never felt the absence of anything essential. He didn't waste time playing politics or cultivating corporate allies. He never learned those small social rituals that magically turn casual coworkers into vocal advocates. He showed up, carried the heavy weight, and went home. You know the type. He looked defeated, quietly carrying the heaviest burdens, having made peace with it. Across the corporate ladder stood 29-year-old Olivia Bennett, looking anything but weak. She just took over as CEO after her grandfather stepped away because of failing health. Olivia was brilliant, sharp, and highly credentialed. She built a rock-solid background in strategy and finance. She earned that power, she didn't inherit it. For years, she proved her worth in boardrooms, where everyone just waited for her to stumble. But running Aurelius Pay was a completely different beast than anything she'd tackled before. This old, massive financial engine was highly complex, and she took the wheel right during a messy transition nobody was truly ready to handle. The crushing weight to prove she was more than just a famous family name was absolutely massive. That exact pressure drove every single instinct she brought to work. She moved fast, hit hard, and absolutely hated any sign of visible laziness. It looked like the exact kind of failure she wanted to destroy. During week 1, she kicked off a massive top-to-bottom operational review, a strict tightening of rules, plus a cultural reset aimed at pushing this business from comfortable straight into accountable. But deep below her shiny new agenda, down in the messy technical basements Olivia hadn't even looked at yet, a real burden was growing. Something unseen had already started failing completely. Stick with me. 2 days before the morning that changed everything. Andrew spotted something bizarre hiding inside the transaction security logs. It started out incredibly small. A weird handful of broken requests popping up slowly in the global processing line. They copied normal traffic so well that the automated security filters just ignored them completely. But our exhausted guy saw it. The rhythm felt wrong. Hard to explain at first, but once he saw the ghost in the machine, he couldn't look away. These invisible attacks weren't trying to crash the system or set off loud alarms. They were quietly learning it. He followed the digital footprints back, uncovering a highly calculated, slow-moving invasion. Hackers had cracked into a forgotten service right on the edge of the network. A weak, low-level security relay managing just a tiny slice of international payment checks. From that hidden spot, they were silently digging much deeper, poking around to see what they could break, building a road to the core servers. Their goal wasn't instant destruction. They were hiding, waiting for a massive traffic spike to make their final move. Steal the funds or just blind the tracking tools completely. Andrew immediately warned his direct boss. His boss, terrified of dropping a massive disaster report on the very eve a tough new executive took over, didn't want to hear it. He told Andrew to just watch the logs and avoid sparking panic without hard proof. The message, delivered very politely, was basically an order to shut up and pray the danger just magically vanished. Andrew refused to brush it off like that. He started raising hidden digital walls around the weak spots he knew were infected. He built trapdoors by hand to swallow the poison traffic without setting off any alarms. He secretly patched the frail nodes. You see the hidden burden. He propped up that sinking system completely alone. He wasn't using proper blueprints. He built defenses with whatever scraps he had, applying just enough care to hold. The real burden, the network infrastructure, was practically ancient in tech years. Just decades of messy patches, partial upgrades, and desperate emergency fixes. And there was absolutely no safe way to take the network offline for cleaning. Keeping the business alive while silently defending it. That meant working without a safety net on a live system. One mistake meant total failure. The 48 hours that followed were brutal. A level of exhausting, unseen endurance that most people never face. Andrew barely moved from the operations floor. Surviving on stale coffee and vending machine food, he quietly changed his shirt in the IT bathroom right near midnight. Coworkers walked right by him. To them, his exhausted presence was just part of the furniture. They assumed he was just handling routine maintenance. Let's pause here. Nobody understood the true scale of his fight. Andrew wasn't just fixing a minor bug. He carried the entire network on his shoulders, using sheer grit, deep experience, and technical knowledge you just cannot teach in a morning meeting. Deep into his second sleepless night, he found something that turned a serious threat into corporate ruin. Hackers had buried a delayed digital time bomb deep inside the servers. A sleeping trigger designed to stay completely hidden during normal operations. But it would detonate instantly if anyone tried a standard system reboot. On any normal day, that reboot was just basic maintenance, used all the time to clear memory and sync up services. If someone rebooted without knowing about that hidden trigger, every single firewall Andrew had painstakingly built would instantly shatter. That sleeping pathway would rip open, unleashing the active phase of the cyberattack. So Andrew wrote it all down. He created a massive file of technical logs, patch notes, and desperate, explicit security warnings. He planned to hand them directly to the executive board come morning, even if it meant totally bypassing normal corporate channels to be heard. He was going to make leadership finally understand. But human bodies have harsh limits that simply crush our best intentions. And Andrew had been fighting a relentless cyber war for 48 hours straight. Staring at those scrolling security logs, waiting for the morning shift, he rested his heavy head for just 1 second, and exhaustion finally took him. Then Olivia walked right in, hitting the operations center at 7:45 for a surprise tour of the company's infrastructure. She wanted to judge this organization raw and without filters. without all those glossy, prepared presentations the department heads usually assemble for executives. She marched across the brightly lit floor, passing glowing monitors and drained engineers finishing up their long overnight shifts. And she froze when she reached the main network console. A broken man in a wrinkled shirt lay slumped asleep over his desk. The monitors around him blazed with status indicators and flashing amber security warnings, plus fast-scrolling data logs that meant absolutely nothing to her untrained eyes. You and I know his struggle, but to Olivia, he was everything she despised. A worker passed out at the most sensitive IT station was a glaring sign of the lazy corporate culture she swore to fix. Careless, unaccountable, pathetically lazy. She didn't bother to read his desperate flashing warnings. Picture this with me. She checked the badge on the desk, read his name, and snapped it aloud. Andrew jerked completely awake. For a few seconds he was totally lost, head pounding, his eyes burning and dry. A low ringing filled his ears as his broken body fought just to wake up. He barely knew where he was when Olivia spoke again. Her words hit with a sharp edge, cutting right through his heavy exhaustion. This company does not pay anyone to sleep on the job. Every IT engineer nearby froze in place. Carrying a burden no one saw, Andrew steadied himself. He recognized the new CEO from last week's memo and instantly knew the situation. He spoke up before she could continue. "You need to hear what I have to say about the core payment cluster." "Please don't." Olivia cut him off without a second thought. "I do not need to hear excuses on my very first morning. Security, take his badge. Human resources, fire him immediately." Andrew looked back, completely empty of fear or desperate pleading. Instead, he had that quiet panic of someone watching a massive cybersecurity disaster approach. He tried one final time. "If someone restarts the servers," but Olivia had already turned away, waving the security guard toward him. "I've said everything I need to." The whole room stayed silent. Several network admins who had been working for hours, who knew Andrew carried this heavy load for 2 days, said absolutely nothing. Standing up to the brand new chief executive in her very first hour would be a massive professional risk, a bold move that none of those exhausted people could pull off. Andrew slowly took off his badge without arguing. He never even raised his voice. He didn't list the brutal firewall battles he fought. He asked for nothing. Let's watch this moment closely. Before leaving, he looked at a young engineer named Daniel and dropped 4 words loud enough for everyone to catch. "Do not restart it." Someone nearby assumed he was just acting dramatic. Another guy figured it was just the bitter last words of a weak, defeated man. Olivia barely even registered the warning as anything meaningful at all. She had already filed the firing away as a strong, necessary act of leadership. A clear signal that the old era of comfortable negligence was officially over. Andrew walked out of that building, like a man with absolutely nothing left to give. They never gave him a single chance to explain the crushing burden he carried. He honestly did not know if that quick warning he left behind would stop the bleeding. After he was gone, the operations floor continued working normally. The dashboards looked totally fine from a quick surface reading. But the secret isolation layers he built overnight were silently absorbing massive malware traffic. They kept the sensitive data stable, carrying the weight invisibly, unless you truly understood what you were actually looking at. To Olivia and the supervisors sitting in her morning status briefings, seeing the network running perfectly fine without Andrew simply validated her quick decision to fire him. We know the truth, but she figured if it wasn't broken, it wasn't urgent. She breezed through her daily scheduled meetings with intense, focused energy, laying out strict expectations for every department head using very precise, clear, and unambiguous language. She preached all about accountability, structural efficiency, and real cultural transformation. Some staff left those meetings feeling truly energized. Some walked away feeling a heavy unease they just couldn't name. Nobody saw the crushing weight Andrew had been carrying, so no one knew how to step in and stop his firing. Down in engineering, the mood felt completely suffocating. A few veteran developers who really knew him were boiling with quiet anger, yet totally helpless. A few of them had already dug into the internal folders hiding his frantic, desperate working notes. The files were packed with complex shorthand. They looked messy, written by an exhausted guy fighting the clock, with zero time to make it look pretty. There were glaring warning signs. Urgent patch notes scribbled in his own deeply personal documentation style, plus several massive red flags obvious to anyone paying even a tiny bit of attention. But let's be honest, nobody saw everything. Everyone held broken fragments, and none of it formed a clear battle plan yet. Right before noon, a processing server started lagging under pressure. Payments jammed the queue, dragging for painful seconds instead of clearing in a flash. The shift supervisor saw a seemingly routine network bottleneck. He wrongly assumed a quick service restart would wipe the memory block and fix the lag. Just a basic key fix he had deployed dozens of times. Before he hit enter, Daniel finally hesitated. "He warned us not to restart," Daniel murmured, his voice so weak it practically vanished. The manager just rolled his eyes. He got fired, that settled everything. In the brutal logic of corporate food chains, a disgraced guy's final warning holds no more weight than a total stranger's. The server restarted. Meanwhile, a shattered Andrew stumbled home, barely awake on his tired feet. His phone flooded with panic texts from colleagues he no longer had the authority to help. He left them totally unread. He found his daughter Chloe at the table, quietly grinding through her math homework. He forced a weak, exhausted smile before collapsing heavily onto the living room couch. He did not even remove his coat. He left his laptop open beside him, the screen silently tracking threats, and blacked out before he even realized his eyes were closing. That fateful reset triggered at 12:47 p.m., right as the midday trading window hit its most frantic peak. For a few minutes, everything looked deceptively smooth again. Queues cleared, traffic sped up, the manager breathed easy. Then the security tokens broke sync. It hit in terrifying waves. The first red flag was a batch of transfers flashing bizarre system errors. Payments showed up entirely blank, like they never even started. The main security service instantly dropped its secure primary link. The reset destroyed the exact memory block where Andrew's frantic, unseen cybersecurity shield had been running. His secret barriers collapsed. The hidden malware awoke. Now you and I know what comes next, a quiet, technical, and absolutely terrifying total meltdown. Outbound payment routing. Quietly hijacked massive traffic streams toward servers far outside the verified corporate network. Crucial corporate transfers just silently vanished into the void. Several massive payment transfers just stalled. They were trapped in a suspended state, neither finished nor cleanly reversible. Our monitoring systems were totally blind without Andrew's quiet bridging logic. You and I know systems can't always tell glitches from an active cyber attack. The fresh engineers scrambled at a pace fast enough to look impressive, but nowhere near fast enough to stop the rapid collapse. They tried rolling back. It failed completely. The rollbacks wouldn't anchor because that specific system state was never officially written down. It was a desperate live defense built under immense pressure by the one exhausted guy we just kicked out. Next, they tried isolating the infected nodes. But the fragile network connections only Andrew understood weren't mapped out anywhere. A developer pulled up as repository notes, reading them aloud to the panicked team crowded around the main console. His notes predicted this exact failure mode with absolute terrifying precision. But actually understanding them enough to stop the ongoing data breach was a completely different story. Olivia was urgently summoned down from the quiet executive floor. She stepped into the operations center for the second time today. The room had completely morphed into a war zone. Every single monitor flashed bright red. The engineers darted around with tense, silent urgency. They knew a catastrophic network failure was happening, but were terrified to say it out loud. Panicked calls from enterprise clients were already flooding in. She desperately asked what was happening. A senior developer turned around. His face was dead pale, carrying that heavy, resigned look of someone forced to finally admit an awful truth. It looks like he held the entire infrastructure together by hand for 2 straight days. And we just ripped out every defensive layer he built. Let's pause here. He didn't say a name, but everyone suddenly realized who carried that burden. Olivia frantically asked if it was fixable. She begged to know who understood his patch logic. She demanded the CTO, asking exactly what the executive's actual hands-on knowledge of this legacy IT infrastructure was. The answers she got offered absolutely zero comfort. The guy was great at strategy but completely useless in the technical trenches that mattered now. The team in that room knew enough to poke at the problem, but lacked the deep, grueling insight needed to stop a live cybersecurity threat. The critical documentation that should have existed for these essential systems was simply never written, or was hopelessly out of date. The company was bleeding out, and the unseen guy carrying the heaviest load to keep it alive was fired this morning. Olivia slumped at an empty workstation, reading Andrew's messy notes from start to finish. Deep inside the repository folder Daniel flagged, she found merged log files and time-stamped patch updates, plus a raw text file. It read like frantic field notes from a soldier carrying a crushing load expecting zero backup. Right at the bottom of the final page, typed slightly larger than the rest, sat a desperate warning that was clearly added at the very end. If I'm not here anymore, do not restart those core services under any circumstances. This is not a simple performance bug. This is a staged malware attack waiting to trigger. Call me first. He left a phone number. Not a single person bothered calling it. See the tragedy? Everyone tried their hardest, but without the guy who secretly carried our heaviest burden, their best would never be enough. Olivia shut the file. She sat in silence, pressing her hands flat against the desk. A deep, heavy guilt hit her, impossible to quickly process or simply push away. She pictured his exhausted face that morning, the desperate, heavy urgency he had frantically tried to communicate. She had not simply misread his panic. She had entirely dismissed him before even trying to understand. Certain she just saw weakness, she had completely refused to see the massive burden he was actually carrying. She asked Human Resources for his home address. His employee file was bare. It took minutes digging through emergency contacts just to verify his current address. She dialed his number 3 times. Each call rang endlessly without any answer. She realized his exhausted body might truly be unable to hear the ringing. Grabbing her keys, she headed straight out to the parking garage and drove directly to the location from her computer screen. Come with me to this quiet, older neighborhood. It was a humble place where real survival actually happened. Olivia paused briefly outside her vehicle, feeling the stark contrast between her sleek corporate office and the humble reality standing right before her. Then she approached his worn apartment door and firmly knocked. Still no answer, she knocked louder. She reached for her phone, but the door slowly opened, revealing a tiny child standing right there. She was small, with messy hair and a worn stuffed rabbit held under her arm. The little girl studied Olivia with the calm, careful eyes of a kid used to reading unpredictable adult strangers quickly. Are you looking for my dad? Olivia stood there completely speechless for a moment. She had absolutely no idea he had a daughter. Andrew never mentioned this unseen burden at work. He wasn't the type to use his personal struggles to gain sympathy around the office. He never said a single word. Nobody else had ever mentioned it either. Deciding this stranger wasn't a threat, little Chloe pulled the heavy door open a bit wider. Inside, the supposedly weak employee lay totally collapsed on the sofa, still wearing his work shirt and jacket from early that morning. His company laptop sat open nearby, the glowing lock screen still cycling. One shoe was completely kicked off. The other remained firmly strapped to his foot. A glass of water he must have poured and completely forgotten sat perfectly untouched on the table. Several empty takeout boxes. Stacks on the kitchen counter proved he absent-mindedly inhaled meals while fighting that massive cyberattack for days. He carried the dead weight of a man who had not willingly chosen to rest, but had just carried his massive burden until he broke. Chloe dropped her voice, instinctively knowing her father's deep, exhausted sleep was desperately needed right now. Daddy hasn't really slept. He said something really bad was happening at work. He promised he would finally rest after he fixed it. Her simple, innocent words struck Olivia right in the chest like a heavy physical blow. Look around with us at this modest apartment, a hidden world of heavy burdens managed with absolute love. She reflected on every cruel assumption she had dragged into the IT operations center today. The arrogant, lazy narrative she built in 10 seconds. Her blind certainty, and the absolute humiliating wrongness of her quick judgment. She softly asked if Chloe was home alone. The little girl explained a neighbor was coming soon, and her dad just collapsed upon finally arriving home. We judged too fast. Olivia finally understood with painful clarity exactly what she had done. She hadn't just made a simple, everyday bad call. You and I can see it now. She fired the one guy quietly carrying the whole company's survival. She did it because his exhausted, sleeping body looked weak. It perfectly matched the lazy narrative she had already made up in her head. She gently touched Chloe's shoulder once. Then she asked if she could wake him up. It took several tries before Andrew finally woke. He woke up slowly, layer by layer, carrying the heavy exhaustion of a truly drained man. Seeing Olivia standing right there in his living room, his face didn't show anger at all. It was pure exhaustion, the kind of look from someone already carrying the world, just getting handed one more heavy rock. He sat up very slowly, staying completely silent. Olivia took the empty seat right across from him. She didn't try to sugarcoat things or slowly build up to her main point. I didn't listen to you today. I fired you before I knew the whole truth. I am so sorry for that. Andrew just stared back in complete silence. He wasn't playing some kind of quiet game. The burden was just too heavy. No amount of perfect words could fix his bone-deep weariness. She kept talking because the ongoing crisis simply wouldn't let her pause. They restarted the system. It's crashing hard. No one back there gets your security patch well enough to stop the bleeding. Andrew just shut his eyes for a second. It wasn't shock. It was that crushing, heavy feeling of being completely right when you prayed you were wrong. He grabbed his computer, quickly loading up the remote system monitoring dashboard. The security numbers popped up. He read them for under 60 seconds, then put the computer down. Those stats perfectly proved the panic already showing on Olivia's face. He didn't jump to his feet. He turned to Chloe first. He asked if she'd eaten dinner, finished her homework, and if Miss Harmon from down the hall was still planning to come watch her. Chloe answered every single question with the calm, quiet patience of a kid who knew her dad carried a massive burden. He had to go do something hard and she wouldn't add to his weight. She said yes to every question. A silent, shared understanding passed right between them. Then he finally looked back at Olivia. I'm going back because if this attack finishes, real people, everyday customers, businesses, everyday workers relying on those servers will suffer for the huge mistakes made by this company. That is my reason, not your apology, not the paycheck. The tired man stood, swapped his shirt, and whispered goodbye to Chloe. He grabbed his computer and jacket, then made his way to the door. He looked back just once. Chloe gave a small wave using her stuffed rabbit's paw. Andrew almost smiled. Then they drove back to the office in pure silence. When he finally stepped back into that busy tech room, you and I have felt this before, an invisible shift in the air that everyone in the room instantly feels. It wasn't cheers. More like the deep sigh of a frightened team failing to handle a huge crisis alone who have finally just seen the one guy strong enough to carry the load walk through the door. He completely ignored the shifting mood. He walked straight to the main computer. Someone silently gave up their chair, and he immediately started checking the broken system's current status. He demanded full server logs and the latest network layout maps. We gave this half-asleep guy a verbal summary of every failed fix since the reboot. He just listened, looking entirely defeated. When we finished, he just stood there in heavy silence for 8 seconds. Then this seemingly shattered guy started delegating. Barely standing, he assigned 5 people to isolate the weird outbound traffic, carefully funneling it into a safe sandbox instead of blindly blocking it. He directed 2 more engineers to build a mirror tunnel tracking exactly where the redirected transaction data was bleeding out. A 3rd group was told to prep a controlled failover for our most critical processing queue. He tasked someone else. From legal to urgently contact our 3 biggest enterprise clients right away with a scripted message admitting a minor glitch, carefully dodging any massive contractual penalty clauses. He even told one guy to do nothing but log his every command in sequence. You and I might judge appearances, but his delegation was an absolute masterclass. But Andrew wasn't showing off. This drained man was executing a defense plan he'd mentally built for 2 days, tweaking it on the fly for a network breach that had gotten much worse than expected. He understood our systems the way only silent, grueling, thankless dedication can produce. Not just how it was meant to work, but how it mutated into something entirely different, and how that messy structure handled extreme pressure. Over the next 90 minutes, the digital bleeding slowed. The malicious routing tunnel was completely sliced away from our core financial payment layer. 3 paused high value. Transactions got fully quarantined before a single dollar could transfer. The outside threat was caught and killed using 17 precise changes to the security settings, slamming the back door the hackers had built and throwing away the key. We still took losses. Several smaller payment batches would need tedious manual fixing. 2 major corporate clients would get formal breach notifications. You and I both know the upcoming audit would be wildly expensive. But the catastrophe, a massive theft of corporate cash followed by a devastating, highly public PR nightmare, was completely prevented. When Andrew finally confirmed the security layer was stable and the hacker's tunnel was permanently dead, everyone in the room just exhaled. Olivia, who had quietly hovered on the edge of the bullpen this whole time, felt the sheer panic wash out of her in a dizzying heavy wave. Management called an emergency review within the hour. Department leads, the CTO, and the board's tech guy piled into the main conference room. The complete breach report was finally laid out. This so-called lazy guy caught the cyberattack first, 2 days before anyone else. He flagged it through proper channels, only to be brushed off and told to wait. He spent 48 sleepless hours carrying our entire network infrastructure on his back. They fired him before he could warn the new CEO. His explicit warnings were completely ignored after they kicked him out. They pushed the restart anyway, and the fallout was exactly the disaster he'd warned about. Instantly, executives in the room started reaching for that careful corporate language. The kind companies used to safely spread the blame out widely enough, keeping the real, heavy burdens carefully hidden from plain sight. Just calling it process gaps, excuses that ignore the actual human toll. Olivia knew these empty words well. She had used them to dismiss people before. She completely understood the evasion, and she knew hiding behind that corporate speak would just crush the tired people saving them. She finally stood up. This morning I fired Andrew Foster. I fired him before hearing a single word about his invisible struggle. I judged him on a single glance. I saw weakness missing the crushing weight. I was entirely wrong. My blindness nearly brought this entire enterprise down. A catastrophic cyber failure we never could survive. I publicly apologized to Andrew. He carried us all alone. You and I rarely see this, the heavy, profound silence when real vulnerability and cost are finally spoken plainly. Down at the far end, Andrew just gave one small, quiet nod. He didn't fake a warm smile or perform grand forgiveness for the executives watching. He took it in with the profound stillness of an exhausted man putting a heavy burden down. Not out of joy, but because carrying that resentment served absolutely no one. In the following weeks, leadership scrambled to reward his unseen cyber defense efforts. They threw immediate promotions and massive salary bumps at him, and a new executive title overseeing network infrastructure. Complete authority over corporate security, the real power his silent expertise had always truly deserved. But what did he demand first? Before signing anything, he forced them to look at the broken, exhausting system. He demanded a clear escalation protocol, giving the unseen frontline tech workers a direct line straight to executive leadership when major security risks emerged. A lifeline that lazy middle managers couldn't cut just to keep their own jobs comfortable. He pushed for strict rotation standards in the ops center, guaranteeing that it was structurally impossible for one tired soul to carry the crushing weight alone. Finally, he demanded ironclad protections for those invisible corporate engineers who actually sounded genuine threat alarms, shielding them from management retaliation entirely. You have to picture the boardroom when he dropped this absolute, stunning silence. Every executive sitting there finally saw the man clearly. A quiet man handed ultimate corporate leverage who simply chose to spend every ounce of it on strict policies protecting the next exhausted engineer from being completely destroyed the exact same way he almost was. Olivia accepted every single demand without question. But the real shift didn't live on a piece of paper. It was how she led. Her sharp decisiveness remained. Her standards stayed incredibly high, but she finally learned to see the invisible struggles around her. She actually paused to listen to the quiet, burdened ones. She walked into overlooked departments just to ask real questions, and she learned to ask the exact kind that made exhausted people feel safe speaking truth. She started to spot the critical difference right away between an employee who bragged loudly for attention and the tired soul quietly carrying the whole operation on their back. She never had that kind of true, quiet empathy before today. But you and I know, lessons like that cost dearly. A quiet afternoon, weeks after the massive corporate cyberattack was finally closed out. You and I know his secret as Olivia crossed the lobby, spotting Andrew. The exhausted man was kneeling down, fixing the strap on a tiny backpack. He listened to his daughter completely. She was talking fast, excitedly sharing some long story about her day at school. His face, the same tired face Olivia watched holding back total disaster just hours ago. It looked completely different now. Gentle and bright. You never see that kind of pure warmth in a corporate office. He was no longer just an employee. He was just a tired dad finally going home, carrying a completely different weight. Olivia stayed back. She did not walk over immediately. She finally understood when to step back and let people breathe. Then she walked over, not as the demanding boss, just as a person. She held out a little toy rabbit. The beat-up toy she found in her coat pocket 2 days after seeing it in his messy apartment. Chloe must have snuck it in there while they were waking Andrew up. She wanted to give it back sooner. Chloe's tired face instantly lit up. The little girl grabbed it tight. She tucked it away like it was a priceless treasure. The exhausted father met her eyes. No anger left in that gaze, no forced polite corporate smiles either. Just two burnt-out people who had survived an absolute nightmare. They fought from opposite corners, yet somehow reached a surprising place of a quiet respect neither of them ever saw coming. Think about it. There were no clean, perfect endings here. Just the messy reality of two people who finally saw each other's hidden struggles, leaving room if both of them wanted it to build something far more honest than they ever had before. So it finished right there, bathed in the bright fluorescent lobby lights during the late afternoon, a kid holding a toy and two adults finally seeing the heavy loads they each carried. A tired worker who looked utterly broken had quietly saved everyone in that very room, proving appearances mean absolutely nothing. A boss who thought she knew everything learned the hardest lesson of her entire corporate career that day. That barking orders from above without bothering to look closer is not strength. It is a dangerous, incredibly expensive kind of blindness. What do you and I take from this? In the heavy quiet after the storm, when the danger fades, you realize the weakest-looking people are carrying the heaviest burdens.